The planet Terra, once the jewel of a vast empire, now lay in ruins, its grandeur a distant memory. The great cities, once teeming with life and culture, were now little more than desolate landscapes, a ghost of humanity's former glory. The colonists that remained on Terra, living in small pockets on the outskirts of the ruined cities, had long given up on the idea of reclaiming the legacy of their ancestors. In the absence of an organized government or military, Terra had become little more than a forgotten world, its name whispered only in ancient texts, lost to time. Deep beneath the surface, in the heart of the ancient capital city, buried beneath centuries of dirt and stone, something stirred. A signal, a pulse of energy, crackled to life, undetected by the few scanners still operational on the planet. It was weak at first, barely a flicker in the grand expanse of space, but it was enough. The call was heard. It began in the vaults beneath Terra's capital, in a complex of underground chambers that had remained sealed for millennia. In those vaults, humanity's greatest secret was hidden. The last legion. Soldiers of an ancient time, genetically enhanced and trained to perfection, who had been frozen in stasis, awaiting the moment when the galaxy would need them again. They were humanity's final defense, a legacy of the old Terran Empire. An elite force designed to fight wars that no other force could win. Inside the vaults, thousands of soldiers began to stir, their minds slowly coming back to life as their bodies were rejuvenated. The technology that had preserved them for so long was advanced beyond anything the colonies had. Machines hummed to life, and pods containing the frozen warriors opened one by one, the soldiers emerging into the cold, dark halls of their ancient tomb. General Marcus Andros awoke first, his mind cleared with the precision of someone trained for the task at hand, and his body, though stiff from the long slumber, quickly adapted to the movement he had lost long ago. He blinked in confusion as he took in the sterile, metallic surroundings. His heart raced as the memories flooded back, of a time when he had been a young officer, fighting on the front lines of a war that had claimed the lives of so many. Andros' mind snapped into focus. He had been entrusted with the command of this legion, the last hope of humanity. But what had happened? Why had they been awakened? He quickly scanned the area and saw that the others were beginning to stir, slowly coming back to consciousness. It would take them time to fully process the situation, but Andros didn't have that luxury. A sense of urgency settled over him. He moved swiftly, checking the central command console that had been built into the walls of the vault. The display flickered, showing a map of Terra and its surrounding colonies. A blinking red light indicated a hostile force, an invasion. The Shard Dominion, a ruthless and powerful alien empire that had long harbored designs on Terra, seeing it as a strategic prize to dominate. Andros grimaced as he realized the timing of their awakening was no coincidence. The Dominion had arrived, and they were here to finish what they had started centuries ago. Terra's defenses were outdated, the remnants of the old empire long gone. Without the Legion, humanity stood little chance. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway behind him. Andros turned to see the first of the awakened soldiers approaching. Sergeant Tullia Kor, her fiery red hair still damp from the stasis pods, walked with the confidence of the seasoned warrior. Her eyes locked on Andros, a mixture of confusion and recognition in her gaze. "General," she said, her voice low but steady. "What's happening?" "Dominion invasion." Andros replied curtly, his voice thick with the weight of responsibility. "We've been awakened because they've come. The Shard Dominion is here, and they intend to wipe us out." Kor nodded grimly, her expression hardening. "We fight, then." Andros felt a brief surge of hope. The Legion was awake, and despite the odds, they were still humanity's greatest weapon. As the soldiers continued to rouse and gather around him, Andros knew what he had to do. He needed to form a strategy, and fast. He turned to the rest of the Legion. "Listen up," he barked, his voice cutting through the confusion. "The Dominion doesn't know we're awake yet, but that will change soon. We need to get to the surface, link up with the last resistance forces, and rally them for a counterattack. We've been out of the fight for too long. It's time we remind the galaxy what humanity can do. The soldiers stood at attention, their eyes filled with determination. They had all been bred for this moment, trained to be the sharpest warriors in the galaxy. And now, Terra's last line of defense was back. As Andros looked over his forces, he knew this would be no easy battle. The Dominion were relentless, and their technology far surpassed anything humanity had. But there was one thing that the Legion had that the Dominion didn't: an unyielding will to survive, to protect their home, no matter the cost. As the first wave of soldiers suited up for the fight, Andros looked at the ancient city of Terra, now looming in the distance. It had been a long time since humanity had known peace. It seemed now, more than ever, that war was their only future. With a grim resolve, Andros gave the order: "Move out, for Terra." The air on Terra was thick with the smell of burning rubble and the sound of distant explosions as the last legion emerged from their underground vaults. General Andros stood at the edge of a ruined city, his eyes scanning the horizon. The remnants of old human civilization were scattered in ruins, but in the distance, the enemy was unmistakable. A Shard Dominion's fleet hovered in low orbit, massive warships with jagged edges that seemed to pierce the sky itself. Ground forces had already landed and were advancing rapidly. "General, we've spotted Dominion forces moving through the eastern sector," Sergeant Kor reported, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "They're sweeping the city, clearing out any resistance." Andros nodded grimly, his mind racing. The Dominion had superior numbers and technology, but the Legion had something they didn't: experience. And they had the element of surprise, at least for now. His heart pounded in his chest as he surveyed the battlefield. The Legion's mission was clear: stop the Dominion from advancing further into the heart of Terra and regroup with the remaining human forces. "Form up," Andros commanded, his voice sharp as steel. "We move fast. Strike them before they realize we're awake. Keep them off balance. We don't give them a chance to breathe." The soldiers quickly assembled, their combat exoskeletons humming to life as the advanced technology powered up. The Legion was unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. Genetically enhanced warriors, skilled in both conventional warfare and the use of ancient Terran weapons that had long since been forgotten by the galaxy. They were humanity's finest, ready to unleash hell upon any who threatened their world. The ground shook as they began their march, the crackling of weapons charging echoing through the streets. The Dominion soldiers, alien and brutal in appearance, patrolled the remains of Terra's once great city, unaware that they were being hunted. The first clash came unexpectedly. A group of Dominion shock troops moved through a narrow alleyway, their armor clanking as they advanced. They never saw the Legion coming. With lightning speed, Sergeant Kor leaped from her cover, her energy blade glowing bright as she struck down the first Dominion soldier. The others fell quickly in the chaos that followed, each Legionnaire taking their target with surgical precision. In mere moments, the alleyway was littered with the bodies of the Dominion invaders, their armor scorched and rent by the Legion's superior weaponry. "Move up," Andros ordered, his voice cutting through the static of the battlefield. He gestured to the ruins ahead. "We need to push them back. We can't let them establish a foothold." The Legion surged forward, leaving the fallen Dominion behind them as they moved deeper into the city. But as they advanced, they soon realized the extent of the Dominion's power. The sky darkened with the arrival of additional dropships, their thrusters roaring as they unloaded wave after wave of soldiers, their technology unlike anything the Legion had encountered. "We're not alone," Andros muttered, watching the new reinforcements touch down with dread. These Dominion soldiers were heavily armored, their weapons designed for city-to-city warfare. The odds were no longer in the Legion's favor. But Andros wasn't about to let them have Terra without a fight. He quickly formulated a plan. "Kor, lead a flanking maneuver, get behind them, and cut off their reinforcements. I'll take the main force head-on. We'll push them into the trap." As Kor nodded and moved to execute the order, Andros took a deep breath, feeling the weight of command pressing down on him. The lives of the last remaining humans on Terra rested on this battle. He couldn't afford to lose. With a battle cry, Andros led the charge, his plasma rifle spitting fire into the oncoming Dominion forces. The first few ranks fell quickly, but the Dominion's advance only seemed to grow stronger. The enemy soldiers' faces were hidden behind their helmets, but Andros could feel their malice in the air. They didn't just want to conquer Terra. They wanted to exterminate humanity completely. For every Dominion soldier that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. The battle raged on, ferocious and unyielding, as the Legion fought tooth and nail for every inch of Terra's soil. Explosions rang out around them, the sky lighting up with fire as the 2 forces clashed. Kor's flanking maneuver hit with precision, cutting down several Dominion stragglers and causing confusion in their ranks. But even as the Legion dealt heavy blows to the enemy, the odds were starting to tip against them. The Legion's numbers were fewer, and the Dominion's reinforcements were overwhelming. The once pristine streets of Terra became a war zone, littered with the dead, human and alien alike. Then, as if to seal their fate, a colossal Dominion war machine lumbered onto the battlefield, a towering behemoth of metal and energy. It fired its weapons with ruthless efficiency, cutting down Legionnaires with every blast. The Legion's advantage in speed and surprise was quickly evaporating. Andros watched as his forces fell back, a wave of fear beginning to ripple through the ranks. He couldn't let this be the end, not after all they had fought for, not after centuries of waiting. "Hold the line," Andros shouted. "We can't retreat. Not now." His voice rang out, cutting through the chaos, rallying the soldiers. They dug in, unwilling to give up their home. But the truth was undeniable. The Dominion was stronger, their forces overwhelming. They would need more than just tactics to survive this day. As the giant war machine advanced, Andros realized that his next move would decide the fate of the battle. The Legion was still humanity's last hope, but for how long could they hold back the storm? The battle raged on, and Andros knew that this was only the beginning. The Dominion would not stop, and neither would the last Legion. The streets of Terra were a graveyard. In the aftermath of the brutal clash with the Dominion, the Legion's forces regrouped in the shadows of the city's shattered remains. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt ozone and smoke, the once beautiful spires of Terra now reduced to rubble. The ground was littered with the corpses of Dominion soldiers and Legionnaires alike, their bodies mangled and unrecognizable after the fury of the battle. General Andros stood silently, his gaze scanning the horizon as he processed the cost of the battle. The Dominion's reinforcements had been overwhelming. Despite their best efforts, the Legion had only managed to delay the enemy, nothing more. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, a glimmer of hope had emerged. Andros had learned that the only way to win this war wasn't through sheer force. It lay in the hidden weapon beneath their feet, the artifact buried in the deepest vaults of Terra's ruins. The artifact's the key to turning the tide, Andros muttered, more to himself than to his officers. His voice was low, strained with the weight of responsibility. "We need to find it before the Dominion does. If they control it, humanity's future is sealed." Sergeant Kor, her face smeared with dirt and blood, nodded. "We've seen what they can do with their advanced weapons. If they get their hands on the artifact, they'll wipe us out, General. We need to move fast." Andros looked over his gathered commanders. Kor, Lieutenant Arlen, and the rest of the Legion's elite strike force. They were all battle-worn, their bodies and minds stretched to the limit. But there was no question in their eyes. The mission was clear. The artifact had been buried beneath the capital for centuries, hidden away by those who had once ruled Terra. Only those with knowledge of the old Empire's secrets could locate it. "We'll move out at dawn," Andros ordered. "No time to waste." The next morning, the team set out for the heart of the ancient capital. What remained of the city was now little more than a twisted skeleton, the once proud structures reduced to jagged shards of metal and stone. The sky above was a dull, oppressive gray, as if Terra itself mourned its fallen soldiers. As they moved through the rubble, the quiet was unsettling. The Dominion had pulled back for now, likely regrouping for another push, but Andros knew they wouldn't be gone for long. Every moment they wasted, the Dominion grew stronger. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted, but there was no turning back. If they were to survive, they had to find the artifact. And fast. The further they ventured into the ruins, the more oppressive the air became. The city's architecture had once been a marvel of human ingenuity, but now it seemed ancient and alien, as though time itself had forgotten the world that had once thrived here. Andros led the group through narrow alleyways, hidden passages, and long-forgotten underground tunnels, all the while sensing the faint hum of power in the distance. "We're close," Andros said, his voice tense. "Stay sharp." The tunnel they followed eventually opened up into a vast underground chamber, its walls lined with ancient Terran technology, massive, dormant machines that seemed to pulse with faint energy, as if they too had once been part of a long-forgotten war. At the center of the chamber, bathed in a dim blue light, was the artifact. It was unlike anything Andros had ever seen. The artifact wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. Instead, it was a massive crystalline structure, a jagged monolith that seemed to hum with untapped power. It looked alive, its surface shifting in subtle patterns that defied understanding. The air around it felt charged, almost electric, as if the very atmosphere bent around its presence. Kor approached the artifact cautiously, her eyes wide. "What is this thing? I've never seen anything like it." Andros stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the monolith. "It's what's left of the Terran Empire's greatest weapon. I don't fully understand it yet, but I know one thing. It's the key to our survival. If the Dominion gets to it first, we're finished." But as he spoke, a cold realization settled over him. He wasn't the only one who had sensed its power. A sudden roar echoed through the chamber. The sound of heavy boots clanging against metal grew louder, and the faint glow of alien energy illuminated the far end of the room. A group of Dominion soldiers, clad in thick, black armor, emerged from the shadows, their weapons aimed squarely at the Legion's team. "You thought you could hide it from us." The voice was cold, tinged with malice. The speaker, a tall, imposing Dominion officer, stepped forward, his armor gleaming in the low light. His helmet was adorned with cruel spikes, and his eyes glinted with a predatory gleam. "The artifact belongs to the Shard Dominion now. Surrender, and we may spare your lives." Andros felt his heart race. They had been so close, too close. Without hesitation, he barked, "Weapons free." The tension in the room shattered as the Legionnaires opened fire. Plasma rounds exploded in the confined space, lighting up the chamber with flashes of blue and green. The Dominion soldiers, though heavily armored, were no match for the Legion's precision and firepower. But despite their initial advantage, the Dominion officer was no fool. He quickly signaled his troops to form a defensive line, and in the blink of an eye, the room became a battlefield. Andros moved swiftly, ducking behind cover, his mind racing. The artifact could not fall into the hands of the Dominion. Not now. Not ever. As the battle raged, Andros spotted the officer, his imposing figure moving toward the artifact. He couldn't let that happen. In a flash, he launched himself forward, cutting through the Dominion ranks with the brutal efficiency of a seasoned commander. Just as the officer reached the artifact, Andros tackled him to the ground. The two struggled, the officer's superior strength and armor making him a formidable opponent, but Andros had something the Dominion officer didn't: the will to protect Terra. With a swift movement, Andros drove his combat knife into the officer's chest, his heart pounding as the alien's body went limp. Breathing heavily, Andros pushed the officer aside and turned to the artifact. For a moment, everything was still. The artifact pulsed once, as though recognizing its new protector. Andros' mind raced. The battle was won, for now. But the true test was yet to come. The artifact's power was immense, and understanding how to control it would be their only hope in stopping the Dominion's invasion. The chamber was silent now, save for the faint hum of the artifact. General Andros stood over the lifeless body of the Dominion officer, his breath heavy, his mind still racing from the chaotic battle. The artifact glowed faintly, its energy undisturbed by the violence that had just unfolded around it. Andros' fingers brushed against its surface, and for a moment, he could almost feel the pulse of power within. But even as the feeling surged through him, doubt gnawed at his thoughts. "What now, General?" Sergeant Cor's voice broke through his reverie, her tone calm but edged with worry. Andros took a deep breath, his hand still resting on the artifact. "We can't stay here long. The Dominion will come looking for their officer and the artifact. We need to move, get this thing to the Resistance. It's our best shot at taking them down." The legionnaires around him nodded, the tension still palpable in the air. The room was filled with the remnants of the fight, the bodies of fallen Dominion soldiers scattered across the floor. The scene was grim, but their victory was hard-earned. As they began to prepare to move out, Andros turned to Cor, who was silently checking her weapon. "We'll need a plan," he said, meeting her eyes. Cor nodded, but before she could reply, the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. Andros' instincts flared. He raised his hand, signaling for the team to stop. They all fell into position, weapons raised. The enemy was coming, and they weren't the only ones who had an interest in the artifact. A figure stepped into the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light that filtered in from the ruined city above. It was Captain Elena Volkov, the Legion's second-in-command. Her sharp features were unreadable, but her posture was tense, almost unnatural. Andros' heart skipped. Volkov had been with him since the beginning, one of the most trusted officers in the Legion. But now, there was something off about her. She looked different, colder, more distant than he remembered. "General," Volkov said, her voice smooth, but with an undertone Andros couldn't place. "I see you found the artifact." Andros narrowed his eyes, trying to read her expression. "Where the hell have you been, Captain? We've been fighting for our lives, and you show up now." Volkov didn't flinch at his accusation. "I've been securing our fallback position," she replied, her gaze briefly flicking toward the dead Dominion soldiers. "It's a mess out there. The Dominion's forces are overwhelming. But I've just learned something that changes everything." "What are you talking about?" Andros asked, his suspicion growing. Volkov's eyes met his, a flicker of something unreadable passing between them. Then she spoke, her words slow and deliberate. "The artifact isn't just a weapon, General. It's a key that opens a gateway. I've been in contact with the Dominion, and they offered me a deal." Andros' stomach sank. "A deal?" Volkov's lips curled into a thin, almost predatory smile. "The Dominion offered me power. Control. They knew that we were always the greatest threat to their conquest. They needed the artifact, and they needed me. I agreed to help them. I've seen what they can offer. A galaxy of power, of unchallenged dominion over the stars. I won't let humanity's future be dictated by our broken past." Andros felt the ground beneath him shift as the weight of Volkov's words landed. The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow. He had trusted her, relied on her. But now, she stood before him, her allegiance no longer with the Legion, but with the enemy they had been fighting for generations. "No," Andros said, his voice low and firm. "You can't be serious. You were one of us, Elena. You are one of us." "I was," she corrected him, her tone hardening. "But now, I see the truth. The Dominion's order, their strength, it's the future. Not this struggle for scraps. You can keep fighting for a broken world if you want, General. But I'm leaving this to you." Volkov's hand moved to her side, where a concealed weapon rested, an energy blade, the same kind used by the Dominion. She drew it, its edge glowing with a deadly blue light. Andros didn't move. "You're wrong, Volkov. The Legion's fight is far from over." Kor stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "You betrayed us, Captain. You betrayed Terra." A bitter laugh escaped Volkov. "Terra? You think Terra still matters? The galaxy is moving forward. Humanity has no place in the future unless it aligns with the Dominion's vision. I've made my choice." Andros stepped toward her, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had no time to argue, no time for sentiment. He knew what had to be done. "You've made your choice," Andros said, his voice cold, eyes locked on her. "And now, you'll have to live with the consequences." Volkov's smile flickered, but she didn't hesitate. The blade in her hand hummed to life, and before Andros could react, she lunged. The fight was fast, brutal, blades clashing, sparking as they met. Andros ducked under her strike, his own combat knife flashing in the dim light. They fought like two predators in a deadly dance, each move a test of their skill, their will. Kor stepped in, but Volkov's eyes locked on her. "Don't," Volkov warned, voice barely a whisper. "Stay out of this." But Kor wasn't about to let Andros face this alone. With a shout, she tackled Volkov, knocking her off balance. The fight shifted, and in the chaos of the moment, Andros took his opportunity. With a swift motion, he disarmed Volkov, sending her blade skittering across the chamber floor. Volkov stared up at him, fury in her eyes, but also something else. "Fear. You made a mistake," Andros said coldly. "You betrayed your own people. And now we'll finish this fight without you." As Andros turned away, the others followed suit, leaving Volkov behind. The artifact, the key to humanity's survival, was still in their hands, but their greatest enemy had been revealed, and the war was far from over. The escape from the underground chamber had been swift and silent. The betrayal of Captain Volkov still hung in the air like a cloud of smoke, lingering in the minds of the Legionnaires. They had barely managed to shake the shock of her treachery when they had been forced to leave the ancient vault behind. The artifact, their key to victory, was still in their hands, but its significance had changed. What had once seemed like a beacon of hope now felt more like a ticking time bomb. Volkov's alliance with the Dominion was a dangerous variable, one that could shift the tides of war in an instant. General Andros led his team through the shattered streets of Terra's capital, the weight of their new reality pressing down on him. The battle for the artifact had been won, but Volkov's actions had opened up a new front in the war, one that threatened to tear apart everything they had fought for. "We can't keep running," Andros muttered to Kor as they moved through the ruins. The sounds of distant explosions and the hum of Dominion ships overhead were a constant reminder of the looming threat. "We need to find the resistance now." Kor nodded, her jaw clenched, her weapon at the ready. "Agreed. But we can't ignore the fact that Volkov now has Dominion backing. If she contacts them—" "She already has," Andros cut in, his voice hard. "And that means they know we have the artifact. They'll come for us." He glanced over at Lieutenant Arlen, who had been unusually quiet since the confrontation with Volkov. Arlen was a sharp officer, his mind always working a few steps ahead. Andros could see the gears turning in his head. "What are you thinking, Arlen?" Andros asked. Arlen's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the dark silhouette of a Dominion warship hovered ominously in the sky. "We've got to get to the last of the Resistance outposts, the ones still holding out on the outskirts of the city. If we can reach them, we may stand a chance. But Volkov is still out there," Andros finished for him. Arlen nodded grimly. "And the Dominion won't stop until they have both the artifact and her. We're running out of time." Andros's gaze turned cold. "Then we make sure they never get the chance." The remnants of the Resistance were scattered across Terra's decimated landscape, their forces fractured by the overwhelming power of the Dominion. The small pockets of fighters had fought valiantly, but they had no chance of standing against the Dominion's full might. What little was left of the human forces had taken to hiding in the ruins, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. Andros and his team pushed forward, moving quickly and quietly through the streets of the capital. The artifact was carefully wrapped and secured, its dangerous energy contained, for now. Every step they took brought them closer to their goal, but the air was thick with tension. They knew Volkov wouldn't be far behind. Her betrayal had bought her time, but it had also made her a target. She was hunting them now, and with Dominion forces closing in on Terra, they had little time to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. As they neared the Resistance outpost, Andros's comm unit crackled to life. General Andros. The voice on the other end was familiar, a gruff tone belonging to Commander Halston, the leader of the last resistance group in the capital. We've been expecting you, but you need to hurry. Dominion troops are closing in fast. They've already taken out a third of our defenses. We're on our way, Andros replied, his heart sinking. The odds were growing slimmer by the second. Secure the artifact. Don't let it fall into their hands. We won't, Halston said, the resolve in his voice clear. But we need you here now. We're not going to survive much longer without help. Andros ended the transmission, his mind racing. He could hear the distant thrum of Dominion dropships above, their shadowed forms cutting through the murky sky. The Resistance was pinned down, and the artifact, their last hope, was still in danger. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the ruins gave way to the last of the Resistance's hidden positions. Small, makeshift barricades were scattered along the streets, and soldiers moved between them with the precision of those who had fought for too long. Commander Halston was waiting for them, his grizzled face hard as stone, his eyes filled with determination. You made it, Halston said, his voice low as he approached Andros. I wasn't sure you'd make it out of that hellhole alive. But I'm glad you did. Now we need that artifact. Andros handed over the bundle containing the artifact, his fingers lingering on the surface for a moment before letting it go. It's not just a weapon, he said quietly. It's the key to stopping the Dominion. But we don't know how to unlock its full power. Halston's eyes narrowed. The artifact. I've heard the stories, but no one's ever figured out how to use it. You're telling me you can? We have to, Andros replied. If we don't, the Dominion will take it, and the war will be over. Just as he finished speaking, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A shockwave of energy blasted through the area, sending soldiers scattering. Andros barely had time to react before he heard the unmistakable roar of a Dominion war machine. Damn it, he muttered. They found us. Halston's face twisted into a grim smile. Looks like we won't have a choice but to figure this out on the fly then. The air filled with the deafening sound of artillery fire as Dominion forces landed in full force. Andros's heart pounded, but there was no turning back now. The fight for Terra had escalated beyond anything they could have imagined. Get to the barricades. Andros barked. Hold them off long enough for us to figure out how to use the artifact. We end this now, or we die trying. The war was no longer about survival. It was about victory, and it would be decided in the streets of Terra. The barricades shook as the first wave of Dominion forces descended on the Resistance's position. The ground trembled with the weight of their war machines, and the air buzzed with the hum of their advanced weaponry. Andros and his team, along with the remaining Resistance soldiers, took up positions behind whatever cover they could find. The streets were littered with debris, the remnants of Terra's once great capital, but now they served as their final defense. Hold the line. Andros shouted, his voice booming over the chaos. He could see the fear in his soldiers' eyes, but there was no time for hesitation. The Dominion were relentless, and if they faltered now, everything they had fought for would be lost. The first blast of energy struck a nearby barricade, sending debris flying in all directions. Andros ducked behind cover, the heat of the explosion searing through the air. The Dominion had arrived in force. Heavy armor-clad soldiers poured into the streets, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. The Resistance fighters fired back, their laser rifles illuminating the darkness in sharp bursts. But it was a losing battle. The Dominion's numbers and technology were overwhelming. "We can't hold them forever," Sergeant Core yelled, her voice strained. She peered over the edge of their makeshift barricade. Eyes narrowed in concentration as she picked off a Dominion soldier in the distance. "We need that artifact working. And we need it now." Andros's eyes flicked to the artifact, still wrapped carefully in a makeshift cloth and held securely by Lieutenant Arlen. The artifact, their hope, was now the only thing that could turn the tide of the battle. But they had no idea how to unlock its true potential. The few cryptic legends they'd heard about the artifact spoke of its power that could reshape the galaxy. But there had been no instructions, no way to understand how to activate it. "We'll have to improvise," Andros muttered to himself. "Arlen, keep that artifact safe. We'll find a way to use it, even if it means dying trying." Arlen gave a tight nod, his face grim but resolute. He pulled the artifact close, keeping it hidden beneath his cloak as best as he could. The sounds of battle grew louder as Dominion troops advanced, and Andros's thoughts raced. The Resistance's ammo was dwindling, their barricades were weakening, and their hope was slipping away by the second. A massive shadow loomed overhead. A Dominion dropship, its hull sleek and menacing, hovered just above the battlefield, raining down a relentless barrage of fire. Andros watched as a group of Resistance fighters were caught in the blast, their bodies thrown like ragdolls into the air. "Keep fighting," Andros shouted, rallying the remaining troops. "We're not dead yet. For Terra." But even his words felt hollow in the face of such overwhelming force. As the enemy closed in, the situation grew dire. The last line of defense was rapidly being consumed by the Dominion's assault. It was then that Andros saw it. In the distance, beyond the burning wreckage of their barricades, something caught the light, a faint, shimmering glow. At first, he thought it was a trick of the smoke and fire, but as he looked closer, he realized it was the artifact's energy, faint but undeniable. "Arlen," Andros barked. "Now. We need that artifact activated, or we're done." Arlen didn't hesitate. He turned swiftly, rushing to the heart of the battlefield. Away from the chaos, Andros followed, ducking and weaving through the gunfire, his heart pounding with both fear and resolve. He could hear the cries of his comrades, the sounds of weapons discharging, but the only thing that mattered now was getting to the artifact. When Andros reached Arlen, the lieutenant was standing before a strange glowing structure at the center of the battlefield. The artifact was vibrating in his hands, its surface pulsating with an ethereal glow that illuminated the darkness. Andros's breath caught in his chest as he saw the runes etched into the artifact begin to shift and change, moving with purpose. "It's reacting," Arlen said, his voice filled with awe. I think it's trying to connect to something. I don't know what." Andros's mind raced. The runes weren't just random. They were part of an ancient language, one that was almost lost to time. Andros had seen similar symbols in the old Terran archives, relics from the empire that had once ruled the stars. He had never understood them, but he knew they were important. "Focus," Andros snapped. "There has to be something. Look for a way to connect it to the energy grid. This thing needs a power source." Arlen hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He crouched down next to the artifact, fingers trembling as he examined it. "I think it's tapping into the grid already. There's something beneath us, a conduit. It's drawing power from Terra itself." Andros's heart surged. If the artifact could tap into the planet's core, the sheer amount of energy it could unleash would be unprecedented. It was their last shot at stopping the Dominion. But they had no idea if they could control it. "Get ready," Andros said grimly. "We may only get one shot at this." As the Dominion forces advanced, a massive roar echoed through the air. Andros looked up in time to see a wave of energy cascading from the artifact, surging upward in a brilliant column of light. The ground beneath them cracked, splitting open as energy erupted from the depths of Terra, feeding into the artifact. The Dominion soldiers froze, their weapons lowering as the impossible energy filled the air. The artifact had activated. It was alive, and its power was unimaginable. But just as quickly as it appeared, the light surged outward, striking down the advancing Dominion forces. The shockwave from the energy column shattered the buildings around them, and the ground beneath them buckled as the very fabric of Terra trembled. The Dominion forces were overwhelmed, their armor useless against the sheer force of the artifact's release. Andros barely managed to stay on his feet, his hands gripping the ground for balance. The power of the artifact was unlike anything he had ever experienced, raw, untamed, and far beyond his comprehension. The Dominion soldiers who had been in the path of the energy burst were vaporized in an instant, their bodies reduced to nothing more than ash. For a moment, everything was still. The world around Andros seemed to pause, suspended in time as the energy settled back into the earth, leaving a profound silence in its wake. The artifact had done it. The battle for Terra wasn't over, but for the first time in years, humanity had a fighting chance. The dust was thick in the air, swirling in the aftermath of the artifact's power. Andros stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving, trying to process what had just occurred. The Dominion forces that had been charging forward lay in ruins, their once mighty war machines now twisted heaps of scorched metal. The streets of Terra were littered with the remnants of the battle, but for the first time in days, the resistance had a fleeting moment of victory. Andros didn't let himself feel relief, though. Not yet. The ground still vibrated beneath his feet from the force of the artifact's activation, and in the distance, the looming shape of the Dominion's warship was still visible. The battle may have shifted, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Arlen was kneeling beside the artifact, his hands shaking as he examined it. The glowing runes on its surface had dimmed, but there was still a faint pulse emanating from within. It was as if the artifact itself was alive, but not fully in control. What the hell just happened? Kor's voice rang out from behind Andros, her face smeared with dirt and blood. She had been a force of nature during the battle, taking down Dominion soldiers with precision. But now, there was confusion in her eyes as she approached Andros. "I don't know," Andros admitted, his voice tense. "But it worked. For now, anyway." That wasn't just a weapon," Kor said, staring at the artifact in disbelief. "That was something else." "I know," Andros replied, a cold shiver running down his spine. The energy from the artifact had been unlike anything he had ever seen, a raw, unrefined power that had seemed to warp the very fabric of reality around it. But in that moment, it had been enough to turn the tide. The Dominion had been stunned, thrown back by the sheer force of it. But the cost had been steep. The energy released by the artifact had caused massive damage to the city and the surrounding terrain. The streets were cracked and fissured, buildings crumbling under the weight of the energy wave. There was no telling what the long-term effects would be on Terra's ecosystem, let alone what kind of toll it would take on the artifact itself. Andros turned his attention to Arlen, who was still studying the artifact. "Can you make sense of this?" he asked. Arlen looked up, his face pale. "I'm not sure. It's connected to Terra itself, to the planet's core. The power we just unleashed. It's drawn from the very earth beneath us. But it's unstable. The artifact can't maintain this level of energy for long without causing irreversible damage." Andros' stomach tightened. "We don't have much time then." "No," Arlen agreed. "If we don't figure out how to control it, or at least stabilize it, the next wave of Dominion forces will be able to overpower us, and the artifact will be lost. Worse, if it draws on too much of the planet's energy, Terra itself could suffer." Kor cursed under her breath. "So we're stuck. Either we use the artifact and risk destroying everything, or we let the Dominion win." A low rumble filled the air, and Andros looked up. The Dominion warship had shifted its position, and smaller dropships began descending rapidly, preparing for another assault. The sky was dark with the shadow of their descent, and Andros could hear the hum of their engines growing louder. They were coming for them. Now, Andros said, the word like a crack of thunder. We don't have a choice. Arlen, figure out how to stabilize it. We'll hold them off for as long as we can. Arlen's eyes were filled with desperation. I can't stabilize it without a proper power conduit, a network to channel it through. We're talking about manipulating planetary-level energy. It's not something you just turn off. Then do what you can, Andros said, his voice hardening. We don't have the luxury of figuring it out slowly. Kor took a step forward, her rifle in hand. We'll keep them at bay. Just make sure that artifact doesn't go haywire. The resistance soldiers, though battered and exhausted, were ready to fight. They had seen what the artifact was capable of, and it had given them a glimmer of hope. But hope wasn't enough to win this war. It would take blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Andros moved to the front line, signaling for his soldiers to prepare. They had already lost so much, but they weren't about to give up now. Not after everything they had fought for. Not after the artifact had given them a sliver of a chance to defeat the Dominion. The first dropship landed with a deafening thud, its ramp descending to unleash a wave of Dominion soldiers. Their armor gleamed in the dim light, and their weapons crackled with energy. They had come in force, and they weren't going to stop until they had the artifact in their hands. Andros didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his rifle raised, his heart pounding in his chest. Kor and the others followed suit, their guns blazing as they opened fire. The first wave of Dominion soldiers was met with a storm of resistance fire, but they were well trained, their tactics efficient. The fight was brutal, the air filled with the sharp sound of laser fire, the cries of the wounded, and the deep rumbling of the Dominion's war machines. We're not done yet, Andros yelled over the din of battle. He could feel the weight of the artifact in his mind, the awareness of its power pushing at the edges of his consciousness. It was tempting to rely on it completely, to unleash its full potential and destroy their enemies once and for all. But the risks were too great. Arlen was still working, his hands moving quickly over the artifact, adjusting its position and trying to connect it to the energy grid. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. They needed more time, but they had no more time to give. The battle was coming to a head. The fate of Terra, of humanity itself, hung in the balance. The battle for Terra had reached its peak. The air crackled with energy, thick with the smoke of burned buildings and the tang of ionized steel. The resistance, battered but resolute, fought with everything they had left. The Dominion forces were relentless, pouring down from the skies and flooding the streets, their assault coordinated and devastating. Yet, despite the odds, the resistance held firm, driven by the spark of hope ignited by the artifact. Andros was at the front, his rifle raised as he took down one Dominion soldier after another, each shot an act of defiance against the overwhelming might of the invaders. Kor was beside him, her face set in a grim expression as she reloaded her weapon and fired again, cutting down a group of Dominion soldiers attempting to flank their position. The sound of the battle was deafening, but Andros was only half aware of it. His focus was split between the fight and the growing sense of urgency at the center of the battlefield. Arlen was still working on the artifact. His hands moved with precision, sweat pouring down his face as he tried to make sense of the energy flowing from the artifact and into Terra's core. It was a race against time. The artifact's power was volatile, dangerous, and it was quickly becoming apparent that it couldn't be sustained indefinitely. They had one chance, one shot, to use it to defeat the Dominion. If they failed, Terra would be lost, and the Dominion would claim the artifact, securing their reign over the galaxy. Andros ducked behind a fallen pillar, narrowly avoiding a blast of energy that scorched the ground where he had been standing moments before. He glanced back toward Arlen. The lieutenant was focused, his brow furrowed as he manipulated the artifact, the glow from its surface flickering erratically. "We don't have much time," Andros shouted over the din of the battle, pushing forward. "Arlen, how much longer?" Arlen didn't look up. His hands danced over the surface of the artifact, fingers tracing the glowing runes. The power from Terra's core surged through the conduit he had established, and the artifact hummed with a low, ominous vibration. "It's unstable," Arlen replied through gritted teeth. "I'm almost there. Just a little more." The Dominion warship loomed above them, its massive bulk casting a shadow over the battlefield. Dropships continued to rain down, and Andros knew the next wave would be even harder to repel. He glanced toward Core and the other resistance fighters, who were desperately holding their ground. They couldn't afford to lose this fight. Not now, when they were so close to victory. "Hold the line," Andros shouted, rallying his troops. "We fight for Terra, for humanity." The soldiers roared in response, their determination renewed. They knew what was at stake. They had fought for years against the Dominion, and now they were fighting for the last shred of hope. But even as they pushed forward, even as they gave everything they had, Andros could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The artifact was their salvation, but it was also their greatest risk. Every second they delayed in unlocking its full potential brought them closer to losing it all. Arlen's voice cut through the chaos. "It's done," he shouted, his voice filled with both relief and dread. "I've stabilized it, temporarily. Now it's time to use it." Andros nodded grimly, his pulse quickening. "Do it." Arlen stepped back, his hands raised toward the artifact, which now pulsed with a steady rhythm of energy. The artifact's glow intensified, and the air around it shimmered with raw power. The ground beneath them shook as the artifact's energy reached its peak. Andros could feel the earth vibrating, the very planet seeming to resonate with the artifact's power. A deep hum filled the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause, like the calm before a storm. And then the storm hit. A column of energy erupted from the artifact, blasting upward with such force that it tore through the sky. The shockwave that followed was catastrophic. The ground trembled violently as the energy beam shot skyward, splitting the air with a deafening roar. Andros stumbled, his breath catching in his throat as the sheer force of the energy left him momentarily disoriented. The Dominion warship, caught in the path of the beam, attempted to retreat, but it was too late. The artifact's energy surged into the vessel's systems, short-circuiting its shields and frying its engines. The warship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, the shockwave knocking several Dominion dropships from the sky. The remaining Dominion forces, now disoriented and vulnerable, were thrown into chaos. The resistance didn't hesitate. They surged forward with renewed fury, capitalizing on the opening the artifact's blast had created. Andros, Core, and the others led the charge, cutting down the remaining Dominion soldiers with precision and determination. The tide of the battle had turned in their favor, but even in the midst of the chaos, Andros couldn't shake the feeling that the cost of victory was still unknown. As the last of the Dominion forces were pushed back, Andros stood amid the wreckage, watching the final remnants of their invasion retreat into the sky. The battle was won, but at what cost? Terra was scared, its surface cracked and broken from the unleashed energy and the artifact's power, though their weapon of triumph had left its mark on the planet. Andros approached Arlen, who was kneeling beside the artifact, his face pale and drained of all color. "Did we win?" Andros asked, his voice quiet. Arlen didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the artifact, which had gone silent. Its glow was faint now, its power spent, but the implications of what they had done weighed heavily on him. "We won," Arlen said finally. "But Terra will never be the same. The artifact was too much for the planet. It's done what we needed it to, but at a price." Andros nodded, understanding. They had saved humanity, but the cost of that victory would echo through history. Terra had paid the price for their survival. The artifact had been their salvation, but it was also a reminder of humanity's greatest strength and its greatest flaw. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, Andros looked out over the horizon. Terra was still standing, still breathing. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven something important today. They would not be conquered, not by the Dominion, not by anyone. For the first time in years, Andros allowed himself to hope. The war was far from over, but humanity had reclaimed their future.